we'll start a minute late. Thanks, everybody. Study session, April 17th, 6 p.m. It's a special added study session, and our purpose and agenda is budget related, but Dr. Thomas can.
Yeah, thanks for the public. Our study sessions are, again, our opportunity to bring topics to the board, to really garner your perspectives, to seek your guidance as we move forward on various topics. Tonight, we've requested an additional meeting with you all to talk more about our budget. I envision there may be a couple of other requests along the way before we get to the final pass in June. Just because there's so many things happening legislatively, we want to make sure that we're keeping things up to date. And so as things change that we think are substantive, we may make a request to see if we can have additional time with the board as well, outside of our individual conversations that we have with you. Tonight, we'll be talking more about our district level budget, more of the departmental budget aspects for our work session this evening. Keep in mind that the conversation that we're having with you today is really bringing you what we have identified as the needs and or emerging needs from a variety of our departments. We're not necessarily asking for everything that we're talking about tonight, but we want to bring the totality of what we believe is really going to help our students, our staff, and really move this district. And so you'll be hearing that tonight. And again, what we're seeking from you tonight is just your guidance, your direction, kind of your perspectives from what you hear from the community and what you're hearing from your constituents as well. That really helps us from a management standpoint and say, okay, this is kind of where the board wants us to prioritize, or maybe less priority over here. And those are the aspects that we'll have to manage through. As I shared a couple of weeks ago at our first budget, I think it was our first budget session, that was more on the teachers and the staffing piece. We are prioritizing putting, a majority of our resources in our schools. And you'll see that tonight, nearly 80% of the resources go directly into our schools. That is priority number one. But my team will also tell you, and I respectfully accept the push, that we can have a lot of support out there in our schools, but if we don't have a strong foundation or infrastructure to support it, we will crumble. So it's a fine balance between how do we support our schools, yet also have good central support systems in play to allow for that magic to happen for our kids. So tonight you'll be hearing, like I said, more of that departmental conversation, and then open it up for questions as we go. Each senior cabinet member is here tonight. They will bring context to their specific budget, and also be here available for any questions that you all might have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tammy.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, good.
Thank you. I have included 4 documents for you tonight. The first one I think we'll talk about is the budget comparison for the revenue. And I've just kind of split out. The last time we met, we showed you the projected revenue that we were going to get with the state aids and the levy. And this is just breaking those dollars down a little further into the different specific budget buckets, if you will, of the money that we get. Because a lot of this has what we call categorical or very distinct ways that they can use the money. So we wanted to kind of break them all out so you can see what all of the different categories are. The general fund is the most flexible. We have the fewest rules around how you can spend those dollars. The difference in the amounts between the 66 million and the 68 million for 23-24, I am assuming a 4% increase in the formula allowance. Both the House and the Senate and the governor have all recommended 4% for the next year. So I'm going to assume that that's what we're going to get. So that's the amount that I put in here. And then I also reflected the reduction in our enrollment numbers. And as you saw at the last board meeting, we are down 149 students from where we ended the year last year. So we've made those adjustments in the state aid and the levy numbers. So you can see The numbers are very similar to what they were last year. The COVID dollars, that's an estimate. We don't know what exactly our carryover is gonna be, but it's gonna be not more than $1 million, and it'll actually probably be less, although we are planning on spending some of those this summer. The rest of the dollars, there's a basic skills for comp ed and basic skills for English learners. In the 22-23, it wasn't clearly broken out how those dollars come in, but for 23-24, I want to be very specific on how the revenue actually comes in. Basic skills, the state defines it as comp ed and ELL. There's two distinct account codes that you can use, so I just wanted to make sure that we had them separated out. The EL dollars, right now the current formula is $704 per identified EL student that qualifies for the funding. That is projected to increase to $1,000 in both the House and the Senate. I did not include that amount in this particular revenue source. You'll see it in the expense report. So we're looking at revenue next year of approximately $112.6 million. And again, you've seen that number before. We broke it out by the state aids and the levy. Are there questions on the revenue before I move on to the expenses?
Question. Did you go over, and I don't remember, the decrease in targeted services and what that means?
It's just basically from enrollment.
That's the whole enrollment piece there?
Yeah,
Targeted, that's what I thought,
yeah,
but I just
targeted
wanted to clarify
services, yeah,
that. Let me go.
correct, yeah.
Okay.
The targeted services includes things like the alternative learning, summer school, after school, and just we have a decline of students that are participating in that program. So it's most of the funding comes in per pupil.
We have a decline in the ALC?
ALC is actually increasing
That's what
with
I
the
thought, okay.
participation in summer school and after
Right.
school.
Okay.
Is the federal decrease COVID related?
Pardon me?
The federal from 1.7 to 500?
Oh, so the difference there is, most of that is related to enrollment numbers. And I tried there's not a real distinct separation out this year on some of those federal dollars. So I wanted to make sure that we were better reflecting how it comes in. So it was just kind of an estimate, but the federal dollars include like the special ed IDEA. I broke out the Title 1, 2, 3, and Title 4. And then we also have some federal dollars that are not related to the COVID, but that we're supporting some of those initiatives in COVID. So, and those are guesses right at this point because we have to get the official dollar amounts from either the state or the federal government before we actually know what they are. And there'll be very specific purposes that we could use those fundings based on whatever the grant is.
I just have a question about the gifted and talented, the difference there.
Again, the gifted and talented, last year, we were funding the gifted and talented program at more than what our state aid was, so we supplemented it. And the numbers that I'm showing for 23-24 were reflective of the exact formula amount. And then as we make final decisions on how the budget, if we're gonna supplement that, then we certainly will. I just wanted to reflect what the budget look like for this current year as opposed to actual funding specific sources for next year.
And we'll talk about that a little bit later too, Lisa, when we talk about the differentiated specialists. That's the supplemental components that will come to round out both the GT as well as any kind of remediation that would be needed for students. More to come in a little bit.
And then under SPED 740, we have 13.8 million. Our actual cross subsidy is a little over 6, right?
Yeah, this is just the aid that we get.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to qualify, it's increasing, and then if the state gives us the percentage of it'll be a percentage of the new number, the 13.8 that we're gonna be filing for, not the previous couple years? Or how does that work? How
I'm
do we-
assuming they'll calculate it the same way, and then it's always 2 years behind, because special ed at
yeah.
the state doesn't finalize their numbers for essentially 2 years. They're still doing the child count, they're calculating the tuition, they're kind of putting the final numbers of students and what their IEP minutes and their disabilities look like. And it's always 2 years behind.
Right.
So I'm assuming they won't be able to change that, that it'll just be the formula based on the numbers from the previous 2 years.
Okay.
And that could change, but I don't know how they're gonna speed up that process.
I'm just worried if they do it and then they don't do it the following year or something like that, and they're still 2 years behind, then it kind of, the numbers that they hear in the legislature is not accurate, and that's, yeah.
Right, and the what they're proposing is an increase in the cross-subsidy aid reduction. So even if we don't get that, we would still have just a larger cross-subsidy. There wouldn't be an aid to offset some of that, the expenses.
But you haven't put anything in there on that cross subsidy.
Not in-
Additionally,
Not in
yeah.
this one, she put the 3.1 million into
In
the
the
other one.
expenses, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions on revenue? Okay, if we move to the expenses sheet. The first number that you see on there is a projection of what our 22-23 is going to end up at for expenses, and it's around 111.9 million. If you just look at the salary and benefits, that's about 81% of our total expenses that we spend. So my assumption in building the budget is that we will have at least that 111.9 million going into next year. And then we know we have most of our contracts, other than the teachers, we know what those are going to look like. And then we know that there's going to be something that we settle for the teachers as we begin those negotiations. So I've estimated our contract salary increases to be $4.8 million. So if we look at those $2 amounts, and then we have a list of all the new investments, we're projecting that if everything on this list is included, we'll have expenses of about $122.6 million, which if you look at that projected revenue of 112.6, I'm adding in the special ed cross-subsidy reduction aid because it looks like that will probably pass. If it doesn't, then we'll adjust that, but there is only 6 weeks left in the legislative session, so I'm hoping they'll get something done quickly. And then there's also some English learner aid increases from that $704 per student to $1,000. That would also net us about $73,000. So if we include all of those sources of revenue and then look at the expense needs, that means that we're projecting a budget shortfall for next year of about $6.8 million. And currently, right now, as of our last audit, and then what we intend, we're so far been right on track for our spending for this year. So I don't really anticipate a huge increase or decrease in the fund balance. So I'm going to assume that the fund balance for the unassigned is about $12 million at the end of the year. And our projected assigned fund balance will be about $7.3 million. So knowing that we need to keep that unassigned fund balance within our board parameters, if we were to use some of that plus some of the assigned fund balance to kind of bridge that budget shortfall, possible budget shortfall, we could still do that and be within the budget parameters of that 8% for the assigned fund balance. And then I just showed a chart that shows about 78% of our money goes directly to schools. So most of that biggest section is elementary, secondary education, which is mostly all the teachers. The special education, majority of that is out in buildings. Pupil support would be things like the paraprofessionals, some of the counselors, social workers, mental health services, and any of the transportation is included in those pupil support dollars. And again, that goes right out to the schools. So if you look at those three, just those three categories alone, that's the majority of the money that's going to our schools. So there is the sites, includes things like utilities, which while it's charged to the building or the district office, it's actually paying for utilities at our schools. So there is also some things in those other categories that are directly related to supporting schools.
Could you just qualify that? The utilities are in the sites and building, or I didn't quite understand that.
Yep, so the utilities get charged as that sites and buildings category when we report our expenses to the state.
Right.
But it's actually the utilities at the building, so it's supporting buildings. So while you're gonna see the dollars are gonna rest here at the district office, it's actually paying for schools.
So it's basically allocated out percentage-wise based upon the utility bill itself, but it's centralized.
We will-
Centralized here.
Got it, okay.
Are there any questions I could help answer about the expenses? And we also have, as Dr. Thomas said, the senior leaders are here to talk about their individual investments.
Do we want to talk about that now, or do we want to finish and come back to it?
Quick question, if you don't mind, while we're on this page. Difference between, give me an example, please, of district support versus administration.
District support would be things like the business services, technology, things that kind of support at a district level. And then pupil support or instructional support would be things like staff development, curriculum development, actually the HR specialists that hire staff. And then the pupil support would be, like I said, counselors, security, social workers.
Administration, what would that,
Oh, the administration would be the Board of Education, the superintendent's office, principals.
So again, and yeah, and that's, Jess, that's a great question. Principals obviously are schools, but they're coded in administration. And I think when people hear administration, they think central office.
Yep.
So it's just an important distinction. We could break that out to put principals into sites and building. But again, we're just kind of lumping them because they're school administrators in with administration, but that is an important distinction for our community to know. This isn't just central office administration.
And we are charging the principals to that administrative line because that's the way the Department of Education identifies the principals. So they have in there's
FARS
a
accounting code,
called the
it's on the-
UFARS manual that
Mhm.
lists the things that you're supposed to include in each of these categories, and principals is one of those things that they require you to report in as administrative.
and that's deans too, I assume?
The-
Not necessarily.
Deans are
No.
TOSAs,
Yeah, the
so they're
deans.
teachers on, so.
Okay.
Mhm.
And they fall under what category, the dean?
They're te-
Elementary, secondary.
Yeah.
On the contracted salary increases, that $4.85 million, can you share what that includes? Is that all salary increases? Is that?
Yeah, so we've settled most of the contracts currently, and we know what we settled them at. So all of those increases are included in that amount. We've also made some assumptions around the ones that haven't been approved yet. So we have to put something in there as we build the budget. So there were some assumptions that were made.
But the assumptions, sorry if I may qualify, are within the parameters that were set by
Yes.
the board, so our assumptions stay within those parameters. We don't know the specifics, but dollar-wise.
So this dollar amount is for all salaries?
Yes.
This would be for
It would-
all, even the ones that are yet to be negotiated.
Okay.
Yep.
And then can you, Amy and I were talking today, but can you help me understand the, I understand that the board sets the parameters. Did that happen, when did that happen? Like, I feel like,
Mhm.
did it happen, because I just
Yeah,
wanna,
so this year,
as I come in, it's like
Yeah.
trying to.
Yeah.
A couple of you, several of you walked in and into the drift
Right.
already. Yeah, there's
Yeah, and so it's
things
just
in
trying to
play.
grasp all that.
Yeah,
Yep.
so the contracts that we have settled this year were actually for this year and next year, aside from the teachers. Teachers, we put on a separate schedule just because there are so many that we have to negotiate. So the principals are on the off year. So the contract, or the teachers are on that off year. So when we settled the contracts for this year for all of the other groups aside from teachers, those parameters, because we began negotiations like last summer, were set by the board a year ago. I guess a little over a year ago. Because then when we start negotiations, then we have to stay within the parameters that were set. So shortly, we'll be having conversations about what the parameters will look like in the next round of negotiations.
But to answer your question, Amy, with each new contract, as they start the negotiations, they did come back to us in January and February and say, are we gonna stick with these? Is this your direction? So we have this many dollars and this much a percentage. And what people don't realize is if you give 2% per year, it's 2% plus 2% after that and all that. So it's a little confusing when you look at the total dollar value because it's spread off over a time. But yeah, we had one contract that didn't go that way, but that was because they were already under market for the average, and we had been under for a while. So we did, I think it was in January, go get that one to be more consistent. So, yeah, and it's confusing. It was, obviously, we have a lot of those conversations outside of the public, and then we set the parameters, and that's what they go with, and then they come back and they figure out how they can move things around to work within that total dollar spend. So it gets,
Yeah.
I don't always get it either after the total dollar spend gets added up, aggregated, and going over multiple years. It can be a little weird.
Because just, what I thought, getting this board packet, I thought, and that's just my newness, right? It's like, I'm actually coming into something that's already, there's parameters already been set, and I was missing a beat there. Amy helped me today.
It's a lot to learn.
Thank
I'm
you.
still learning too.
Yeah.
We're on a journey.
And then I have a question about the contracted salary increases. So does that include anything that we have to pay back retroactively if anything
Yeah.
wasn't settled?
Yeah.
But that number is included in here as
Yes.
well?
Mhm. Yep, and that's part of, as we negotiate it, we make sure that whatever the final negotiation amount is, we've accounted for if there's any retro pay. So this year, every contract that was settled, because we're a year, all of the contracts expired last June 30th. So everything we negotiated this year was retro back to July 1st, and that was included in the costing package.
And then I'd assume in this bucket of salary increases, because when you look at the contract, it includes changes to any health insurance or medical benefits.
Yeah, it's,
So does this also include like any increases, projected increases in medical costs as well? A lot of numbers.
Yeah, you all see the total comp package here, and I hate to say this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tammy, maybe it's happened once in my career, contracts are never settled on time. So very rarely will you find one, so we're always dealing with the retro. Know that staff are always gonna be paid what their values are. So if we're 3 months in, 6 months in, a year in, they will always get retro pay. Benefits, everything that goes along with that compensation. So what you see here is total compensation for health benefits, projected increases, the parameters that the board has set, all of those are kind of rolled forward. Now, if we have a nuance in this whole negotiation with the next group, for example, whomever that might be, and it's kind of pushing up against those parameters, like we did this year, I believe the new board members were seated on this one. We came back to you to say, we may have to adjust something on this one because of the market components that Mary was just talking about, but we can get within 1% of where the parameters. Is that something that you give us authority to do? And there was support for us to go and do that. So anything that's outside of the parameters, we need your approval to move forward. Everything that we're doing falls under what the board has already approved. You know, you get to the bottom line as long as you stay within 10 and 2.
Can I add something just to clarify? Retro is part of the negotiations as well. So they're not, in my experience, there has been times though that I'm aware of in other districts that retro is not a part of it because that's part of the negotiations that was agreed upon, that instead of retroing, they use that money for something else. So I just want to clarify that retro doesn't always happen because it is one of the negotiated items. I would say 99.9% of the time it happens. But I just want to provide clarity around that. That is a negotiated item.
And Amy, just so you know, for budgeting purposes, before the fiscal year, like we're gonna go through this again this year, we have to set parameters so they know how to budget. Otherwise, we don't have the money, they don't set the money aside. So it's just kind of the way it goes. You got a set dollar amount that the board says, okay, here's what we're gonna set aside, and that's what they have to work with, and then they come back to us and say, well, this will work, this won't work, et cetera, and then ask sometimes for new direction.
So as we're facing forward for our budget for next year, looking at investments, that first bucket of 1.8 million, can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. Now, this is actually the conversation that we brought to you several weeks ago prior to the job fair to get your support to go in this direction, because what we are finding is that there is significant need to bring student support services into our campuses. Our deans, our social workers, are switching our online program from middle to solely going to high school. So that's what you see here in the counseling support, going back to a 3 counselor model at our middle school campuses, for example. So that's what that 1.8 was that we brought to you at our first budget conversation.
Is it okay to ask questions
Oh, yeah.
about these
Yep.
specific things?
Yep.
So I have a question about the Laker Online program. Because I recently learned through my own experience that we have Northern Star Alliance, which is a state-run program. And so knowing that we do have access to an online program, and with all the COVID emergency orders ending, just can you help me understand what our plan is for the Laker Online program? Is there a need for it?
Sure.
You know, do
Dan,
we
you wanna
continue it? And
Speak to that? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so that, last year, we launched, we continued Laker Online at the 6th through 12th grade level. And the need was there this year for middle school, but as we moved those students out, the need does not appear. There were only 5 or 6 7th graders who would become 8th graders. There were no 6th graders, so moving into 7th grade. So, however, there is a sustainable amount of students who are interested at the high school in participating in our online offering. Families associate with us, and our Laker families that have been a part. So we have upwards of 40 students currently in the 9 through 12 program, and this staffing would allow us to grow up to 60 students. So a shift of the resources from Laker Online Middle School into high school to expand, because the demand is there at the high school to participate in our version of Laker Online.
And just to expound just a little bit, maybe there's a deeper question here that I'm hearing too. Tammy, can you speak to the reimbursement rate if they were to go to North Star Online versus retained here?
Yes, so, because we're an open enrollment state, whatever district students choose to go to under open enrollment, that district gets the revenue for them. So if we keep the students at our own online program, we're receiving the revenue for those.
100%.
100% of the revenue for those students, as opposed to going to whatever district they're attending.
So if a student, help me understand, if a student attends, say there was no Laker Online, and they attend the Northern Star Alliance program, you're saying we don't get the revenue for that?
Correct. So we
Yep,
lose.
we would lose the gen ed.
Even though if they'd be a district, they're in like a district student?
We don't get it. We don't get the ADM. So
yeah,
it's
so
more
we talked about-
advantageous for us to maintain our own programs. I would also, from a financial standpoint, but I would also add, and Dan, you were alluding to this, and having gone through online programs, you can buy an online program or, education.com, whatever, but it's not your staff. You don't supervise the curriculum, you don't supervise standards, so we actually can affect quality for our own as well. So it's more advantageous for our students to be here versus, I'm not trying to shame any of the program, but.
And we used North Star previously, before the pandemic, and it still has been occasional usage at our high school. We have students that take individualized classes, 1 or 2 classes. And so that is something that we still see on a very small case by case. But our students that have participated in Laker Online, it presents an opportunity for some flow in and out a little bit easier as well, for them to return back to in-person learning should their situation change, where this online isn't working, or they don't desire that, they desire it for a quarter or a semester, for example, due to medical situations. That's been some of the examples in which they've benefited.
And then before Michelle jumps in
Well, I
real
was just
quickly.
gonna say one more thing about North Star Online. You can only enroll up to 50% of your classes in there. It's a supplemental, it's not an all-day online
Right,
option.
and I was gonna say, can you speak to credits as well and transferring credits from Northern Star? Is it seamless, or do we have different credit issues that we faced in the past?
It has worked for students,
Okay.
again, on that case-by-case, individual class here, class there type of situation. It's been, it's worked well, actually, in the past. But most of the students who are participating in Laker Online are full-time online students.
There was, so we went into extensive discussions over the last couple of years, because when the legislature changed and allowed more schools to do this, particularly after the pandemic, and we had to decide whether we wanted to do this or not, but all of our surrounding districts, and we were gonna lose students to those who wanted to do it. Plus, what we did discuss, and correct me if I'm wrong, if they enroll through us and they can still participate in our extracurricular activities, they're still considered, in district, they can go back and forth, so they get the benefits of both worlds. And, yeah, we did have to invest in it, and I think it's paid off. I think we got more kids than we thought we needed in order to break even, right?
We did, and there's
Yeah.
greater demand at the high school level, which is
Yeah.
why we wanted to shift the staffing accordingly from the middle school level. It hasn't arrived, if you will, I would say, online for middle school students as a delivery model, to the extent now there are unique one-off situations, certainly, but it certainly has arrived much more so for high school 9 through 12 students.
Yeah, I think some of the feedback that we got from parents that came to speak to the board as well said that some of their kids actually did better during COVID being online rather than in person, and they wanted that choice.
Michelle, if the students that enroll in North Star, even though this is not a full-time, we still lose all of that revenue, even though it's not full-time?
They become part-time students, and we only get
I see.
reimbursed for whatever they're actually attending our district.
What portion of their day is part of ours?
Right, okay.
So that's what the average daily membership is also, that decimal point.
Right.
How many teachers do we have currently at Laker Online?
So we currently have 1.2 FTE at the high school. We're going to increase it to 2.2. We would increase it to 2.2. And we had 1.2 at the middle school.
And so like for a Laker Online student, they'll do a certain number of classes online. Do they come into the building at all to do any like music classes, gym, or any of that kind of stuff? Or is it all specifically like online?
Most of them, the vast majority of them are specifically online. There are occasions when they work a unique situation
But they
with
could
those
if they
students.
wanted to,
Yep.
or flex their schedule,
Yeah.
whatever, so.
Yeah, and Lisa's actually kind of scratching at an itch that I've been trying to figure out as well, and that is, to add to your question, any families that are doing homeschool, there are, having seen a couple of them in Colorado, there are some districts that have found ways to do exactly that, Lisa, where you might do your core at home minus science, even coming in to do science labs in the school. If you want to participate in band, PE, large motor, a little hard to replicate at the kitchen table. So I think there's an opportunity that, the board may want to consider. How do we not lose everything for a homeschooler? And that we might be able to retain a certain level of that ADM if we're coming in for some of those larger electives or courses that are just not easy replicable at home environments, so.
And we've actually had situations like that currently where students do come for particular offerings that are difficult to deliver
Yeah.
in the homeschool
Yeah.
format. So
And usually the homeschool demographic, there's a specific reason why they're choosing homeschool, but they're likely to mesh well with online demographic of student, not kind of like your just general population of students. So there's a niche that they feel more comfortable having their kids involved with a smaller cluster of students. So that kind of, that's something for us to explore. I think there's an opportunity for us to explore that more. Great question.
Do you mind if we hop down, or we can go one by one, I don't know.
Sure, we
how
can
you
go down to the
envision
next
it.
group.
Yeah, or
Just
wherever people want to go, but we have finite time.
Sure, we'll just ask if there's any questions on the next group, which tends to be more of our special ed cluster. And there's actually more resources that we're looking at supporting, but some of that is being reimbursed through federal special ed dollars than what you see here. This is in addition to what is not reimbursable.
Okay.
Is the psychologist at a certain level? Like, is it elementary, middle, or high school?
Well, we absolutely need some more at the middle school level. Right now, I have one school psychologist split between the two middle schools, which isn't working well since they have their problem-solving team on the same day, which they have to do, scheduling reasons. But it'll kind of have a cascading effect. I'll have to sit down, depending on the skill and experience of the school psychologist we can find. We will shift around assignments to leverage
Okay.
skill.
I just have more of a macro question.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at the special ed budget of 13 million, now I've got to double check my numbers, but basically is our cross subsidy need going to increase by 1.3 million, even though we're given 3.1? You know what I mean?
So the 13 million is the revenue that we're receiving for but we spend more than that. In order to get
Right,
that
it's more
13
like
million, it's like 20 million.
20.
Yeah.
And
So our-
this is an additional 1.3 to the 20, and we anticipate we might get 3.1. So really, the 3.1 would be cut down to like,
And eventually, so whenever you add special education staff, in theory, you also add revenue. In theory, it takes a couple years to catch up. But roughly, we get back about 60% of the cost of our special education reimbursable expenses, which would be teachers. And
but because of, it
it
takes
just
2
takes a
years.
couple years, so we end up having kind of fronting that money and not getting it back the first year or two, but then it kicks in.
But this is demonstrating that we're seeing an increased need.
So
what you're
I
showing
can give
us.
you like a quick, we are decreasing enrollment, we know that as a district, but we are steadily increasing in special education. So we have 40 more just in elementary resource and center-based students next year than we have had this year from when we staffed last year. So some of that increase we're supporting right now. So that's the ask for that. All of the FTE that I'm asking for resource teachers is for elementary. And then almost 70 new students qualified for speech language disorders. So they're already servicing 55 to 60 kids right now, so trying to get that down to a more reasonable number. They're also able to generate revenue for us through third-party billing if they have time to fill out the paperwork. So I'm just trying to maximize revenue and student achievement all at the same time. Our lead teacher that I'm asking for is to help with. Right now, they're across 3 buildings at our elementary level, so all they're doing is evaluations. They're not able to do program support and kind of help up with those issues that come up, and then just increase that regular communication between building administration and special ed. Our building administrators are absolutely fabulous in supporting special education, but it's tricky and it's hard, and it's really hard to do without regular communication. They serve in that role.
I would also say, oh no.
I was curious, you have 8.5 special ed pairs added?
Yep.
Are you gonna be able to staff those?
Well, Hope Springs Eternal, right? So the school board did a great job, and our HR department and business services making a better contract that's much more competitive to districts around us. However, it came in September. So that was after people were looking. So what I'm hoping is we can recapture some of those pairs that we lost that want to work here in our district. And so we'll use that new contract as a recruiting tool. So that's my Hope Springs Eternal. And a lot of that's to cover the one-on-one para needs that we have that just, right now, that's where we have to cover. And then some of these other para jobs that we have just are being filled in by teachers and different things, and just beef that back up to where it needs to be.
I was just going to say that, these 2 items we are kind of watching in tandem. If these were to play out in their entireties, the question, which I think is very fair to ask, is does the preventative support of that first grouping really help address the emotional and social needs that our kids are having that are finding themselves left unaddressed, manifesting into deeper mental health needs of support through special ed. So for us, we could envision the block of special ed support diminishing over time when we have more of that proactive support on the front side. So that's something that's a conversation that we've been having, but we don't have a proof concept around that until we kind of see what happens, particularly around that first level of preventative support.
But, data always supports that. Early intervention is your best.
And it also shows that early intervention is more costly on the front end, but saves you money over the long term, of a student's educational career. So that is the logic that we're applying here. I just wanted to point that out. That's a very real conversation that we've been having as a senior team.
I have a 2-part question. One, when's the last time we actually increased any of these as far as
You're asking me
ratio?
a tricky question since I haven't been around very long. But we have not added school psych support in 7 years. I did find that out. So we've increased 300 or 400 students over the last 7 years in special education. We have not added any there. I think from that SPED lead, it was a position, and I think it was cut. So that additional lead, so it's bringing that back. That early childhood teachers also bring us back to pre-COVID numbers. So we have dropped quite a bit in preschool programming, and now we're back up. So some of this is adding back what was cut. I don't know on paras. Paras is always kind of a moving target in the last several years when it's been hard to fill. I can, like I said, Hope Springs Eternal, I can put them out there, hope that we can fill those positions, but.
My second question is pre-pandemic, I would sub in on the SPED committee and also be on the Southwest Metro, and they were constantly showing numbers about just what you said, the percentage of kids as a whole, regardless of the population of students, has had increasing numbers come in with needs that we know starting in pre-K and K, et cetera. Do we have any type of trend analysis that's
I
that's at all, substantiated?
We don't that I have found yet. It is something that I'm working to start, like how many kids are we qualifying at each building each year? How many kids are we doing through intervention? We just haven't done that historically, unless there's something that exists out there that I don't know about. But I don't think there is. I just look at some of my senior leader counterparts, some of them haven't.
Well, I know that we were talking about state numbers when, at the MSBA level as well as the Southwest Metro and here.
Yeah.
And they were saying overall, all
Yeah.
the districts were experiencing this, and I didn't know if there was some sort of like percentage increase that we could actually.
Yeah, I can
project
probably
out.
look that up through the state, through, like December 1st child count, like what it was each December 1st. I know our numbers have increased significantly each year on December 1st child count, but how that compared to our total enrollment, but I can have that, get that for you.
So, because of that, and because I remember that conversation, so it was a pretty strong conversation about the percentage of kids.
Yeah.
If we increase this, I mean, we're still gonna be treading water if we wanna be proactive, right? I mean, is that a fair statement? Because, I mean, we're behind right now. We wanna at least get to the point
Yeah,
where we
well-
can put a straw out and breathe.
I'd be speculating to answer that. To Michelle's point, the only thing that we can speak to is that we are reinstating what we had cut. So we're kind of bringing us back up to level. But the question, again, remains as to what does that support look like and how effective is that support? And, did we need more pre-pandemic? I wasn't here, I can't speak to it, it's all speculative, but kids have changed, in COVID. Family dynamics have changed since COVID. So we are seeing a lot of things in our schools that we did not see pre-pandemic in terms of the kind of stress and things of that nature that many of our students and families are subjected to. So honestly, Mary, I don't think we could, say affirmative. But
There's probably not an apples to apples. What I
Yeah.
hear from the ground, from principals, from teachers is, when we think of special education, no more is the student that just is struggling at reading. We're struggling with reading, attention, behavior,
Yeah.
and so it just takes more to support some of these students
Right.
than it did before. So part of it's treading water, some of it's trying to get a little more ahead of it. But I think to Dr. Thomas's point too, first, like, mine's the second big investment. The first bigger investment
Yeah.
was some of those proactive strategies where we can, help with some more dean and counselor support and.
Yeah, that prevent.
I'm
Yeah.
for it. I'm just
Yeah.
saying that I don't wanna
Yeah.
give the impression that this is all. we need.
Solve, no, it's
Well,
not.
yeah,
gonna be.
so
You're
folks-
right,
Yeah,
but it might give
and
us a little straw.
so I would say this too, and you continue to hear this from me. We also have to be mindful of our resources.
Yeah.
And be very smart so that we are making the right investments that have the greatest impact for our students and our staff, and ultimately, this whole community benefits from that. So we have to balance that, and we'll assess that as we go. But again, as we've talked, at the districts that will continue to thrive are those who are going to be able to really support the whole student. And where some of our colleagues might be going through some significant challenges and cuts, do we want to take an opportunity to really find a niche to bolster our support to be very attractive? And it's just the right thing to do. We know this. I mean, Michelle, Dan, and I met with a lot of the support staff, psychs, counselors, social workers, about a month or so ago, all huddled up at the middle school saying, what are the needs? And I mean, that was the very first conversation I had when I started here, was hearing from one of our counselors sit down over coffee and say, Michael, let me give you the backstory, and I'm going to be coming to you in the spring. I mean, it's there. And, we saw what just recently happened at one of our middle school campuses, and I just asked myself, gosh, could we have done something different if we had different support, It's a bad place to be as a leader, to be thinking that, but they're clamoring for preventative support. Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Sorry. Health aid floater, any
Yeah, I
any
questions on that?
questions?
Yeah, can you explain more?
Yep. So we have a health aide at every single building in our district, Safe Bridges. And with that, that's the only person that staffs our health office. Through that, we also like every other, do have absences, and the health office needs to be covered. And we're having a very hard time finding sub-nurses. So then our licensed school nurses or our health coordinator have to stop what they're doing for the day and go sit in the health office because someone has to be in there. So what we're hoping is that we can reduce that by hiring someone to cover the absences for our health offices. We had about 250 absences with our health aides last year, so should be not a problem to use that person on a daily basis.
So each building has a health aide
Mhm.
that's staffed every day, and how about, what's our ratio on nurse?
Oh, our LSNs, we have 3 LSNs district-wide,
Okay.
so plus our health coordinator, so I guess 4 LSNs.
So if all of our health offices are staffed and there aren't any absences, where would this help float or kind of live? Or is that actually not an accurate
Actually,
statement? There's usually some kind of
Kate
absence.
has a plan for all of that. She's like, there will be no problem
Yeah.
keeping this person busy. Because no matter where this person goes, they'll have little projects that they'll also be working on. So whether if they don't have a health office to go to that day, there will be a spot. Yep. I think you're right, it's not gonna be a lot of days.
Yeah, probably not, but.
Thank you, Michelle.
All right, any, going down to the next category of IT. Marcus is here to, if there's any questions you all may have around that.
The technology support in kind of the SPED cluster, so why?
She's referring to the assistive
Well,
technology?
Oh, assistive
Yeah.
technology, so that's a little
So
bit
why
different.
would that be in SPED and not like Marcus's team?
I will tell you why. So assistive
Curiosity.
technology is an IEP service. So it's not really like it's not like a computer so much.
Thank
It's
you.
like
Okay.
any sort of assistive technology a student might need, like a speaking device, or,
Alright.
how can we take the tech they have and make it a way that they can access education. So we have the assistive tech person. She's like 0.2. So we have 1 day a week to cover the needs of all the students in the district that need some assistive type of access. So I just am hoping to increase her to 0.6 so we can actually be effective. Because right now she's like me, somebody will send her a request and they have to wait a few days, she'll get to it, but then now 3 more have piled up.
So this is to help the person we already have?
Yeah.
This isn't in addition to her?
It would be increase her FTE, which then adds more speech. So some of that 1.8 speech FTE is to cover some of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to backtrack.
No, it's okay.
That's all right. The one piece I do, Marcus, want you to speak to, just given what has happened in the metro with a couple of our colleague districts, is the ransomware hacks and things of that nature. And maybe you can speak to the firewall components here.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Okay, right here? Okay. In our list of requests, we do have an upgraded firewall. Our current firewall is a FortiGate 1500 and is end of sale, and it'll be end of support, I believe, in 2025. So we did put in for a new firewalls. That is, we also applied for E-rate. So you saw an email from me earlier about the firewalls and what E-rate is and how we apply for it. So our firewalls qualify under Category 2 for E-rate, and that's, so we've submitted a Form 470, which was a request for proposals. We did make a decision to go with a WatchGuard firewall and firewalls, that's plural. And it's in the 471 process, which is currently under review. So if that's approved, that amount would be reduced by whatever percentage is allotted and allocated through E-rate. So it will be less than that for $75,000. But to Dr. Thomas's point is that we want to stay as current as possible on our infrastructure to do our very best to mitigate any and all risks from bad actors. So we just upgraded our host this year, and we continue to look at our edge devices, edge equipment, our infrastructure, everything behind that curtain to make sure that it is current and up to date.
The iPads at 6 through 12.
No, it is
6 and 12?
6 and 12. Thank you for asking that question. Our current 11th and 12th graders have 5th or 6th gen iPads. Those are roughly 5 to 6 years old. And in our current Cascade plan was our 12th graders, when they graduate and leave us, they turn those devices in, and those iPads are repurposed to our 6th graders. The issue with that is that being the age of the equipment, our 11th and 12th graders have 5th or 6th gen, again, 5 to 6 years old. And with iOS 17 looming, maybe launching this somewhere in September, Apple, and when Apple does that, we don't want to lose functionality. And we also would like to take this opportunity to get 6th graders a 9th gen iPad, and then next year's 12th graders an iPad Gen 9 as well. So what that does for us as far as our inventory is that students 2 through 12 would have an 8th or 9th gen iPad if this is approved. And what I did was I reached out to Apple, and they've included a 2-year lease at 0% with a $1 buyout option at the end of the lease. So that's what's reflected in those numbers. So that would be a 2-year lease for next year's 6th graders and next year's 12th graders. And again, that helps us consolidate our device offerings. So K and 1 will have still 5th and 6th gen, but grades 2 through 12 would have a 8th or 9th gen. We're not pursuing 10th gen iPads because they've changed their specs. They've went to USB-C, and they've ditched their headphone jack. So we're trying to stay consistent in our offerings. So that's why it's a 9th gen and not a 10th gen.
So are you saying that the kinders 1st and 2nd, they have a newer generation than?
No, K and 1 have 5th gen.
Oh, they have 5th then?
5th or 6th gen. Currently 2 through 10 have a 9th gen, 8th or 9th gen.
So could you do some shifting with the younger grades?
We could, it's double or triple A handling equipment that's already stationed in a cart. And we want to reduce the amount of 5th gens or 6th gens that we have in our inventory. Which if we pull back this year's 12th graders' 5th or 6th gen iPads, we would go out for a fair market value and try to resell those as well, for whatever they're worth. Yep. I have two team members working on all mobile devices in our district. That's over 9,000 devices plus the MacBook Airs as well. So, to answer your question, can we reshuffle? Yes. Is this an opportunity to upgrade our inventory and our offerings? Yes.
I actually had a question about that, Marcus.
Yeah.
With the 2 people who support all of those devices, why not request additional staff?
We're putting the money towards students and staff. And yes, support's a big piece of it, and that's what we do. But we have a lot of needs as far as hardware goes right now, and that's where we've allotted our priorities. So to speak to that process, what you have in front of you is I worked with my team, and we had a brainstorming session. It was multiple department meetings where I said, each one of my team members, each one in my department, you're a member of a team, whether it's data systems, network, devices, or field techs. I said, I need you to bring forth your high priorities and what you see as areas of where we need to address. And then we had multiple meetings on vetting each one of those teams' requests. And after that process, and we vetted it, this is what we're bringing forward. So I've gone through the process with my team, and we're putting students and staff and mostly devices that are in their hands first.
And if they're a little bit more advanced devices, then the support won't necessarily be.
Yes, and when there's an opportunity to reduce the amount of offerings and it's the same type of device, there's efficiencies there as well. Absolutely. 5th and 6th gen iPads, again, they're 5 to 6 years old. We've got a tremendous return on our investment from those, but the batteries are starting to go with new iOS. When Apple releases a new OS, some of those older devices stop dropping off and they lose support as far as being able to upgrade or functionality. So doing the best we can with what we have.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martha.
So the next category is coming out of our communications department, and next week, I believe, we'll be coming to you all, or is it next week or is it the week after, Morris Leatherman survey? Yeah, next week. And also we have the Studer survey that we're cleaning, that will be made available to the board once we de-identify the data set, just a FYI on that. So more to come to you all soon for you to be able to review. So we have all this wealth of data, and we've got two great people in communications. Neither, to my knowledge, is a marketing specialist or in their background. And so part of what this is about is, so how do we now take the data and turn those into enrollment? And that's a key component for us to really bolster. We know what demographers say in the projections, and that's happening. It's playing out pretty well. But there are ways that we can interrupt some of that. And we're really keenly interested in getting strong marketing strategies to address our ability to bring back, those, especially those who are in our attendance area, who are not choosing us based upon what we review with that survey. So part of this is around consulting fees, as well as similar to what we've done with the referendum campaigns, to do vignettes and videos and things of that nature, materials that will go out to our public as well. So part of that is baked into them. So Christy's here for questions that you all might have around that as well.
I just have a comment. So I know a very slim team. I'm fully aware. I think you guys do an amazing job. And one, I think it's going to be very interesting to hear what comes out of that survey. And then knowing what comes out of the survey may help us to identify, will hopefully be able to help us identify if any resources need to be put into place within our buildings, The other thing is, I've spoken to another district that's close to us, and they use actually a community engagement committee. And I know I mentioned this back in our January meeting when we were talking about committees, is they actually use, and we had set up a meeting and talked about this as well, is they use a committee to support this need. So could we perhaps look at using a committee formed of our community to support this versus hiring someone? It's just a thought. And then take that money and put it back into maybe a need within our district. So. And Shakopee is the district that has a community engagement committee that I'm referring to. So it's just an idea. I mean,
Yeah, the community engagement does not handle marketing though for the district.
Yeah, I think
So,
both could work.
yeah.
I mean, I think that, it's always good to have, people in the community that you can have two-way communication with and kind of be that sounding board and talk about, what's working well, what things are not working so well. And I think that can also be part of the research to learn, what do we need to do to go above and beyond that translates to boosting enrollment. And that gets to some really, deep tactile kind of things within a marketing department that can, they strategize and they look at, all kinds of things with video and with making sure that we rise to the top of Google searches and we're, all those kinds of things that take a lot of time and a lot of expertise that are kind of above and beyond what we do on a day-to-day basis. So that's kind of what I was thinking. There are some districts that work with consultants in that regard. I don't know a lot about that. I have not done a deep dive into that, and that number that I put into the document is just very preliminary. Because like I said, I have not contacted vendors, but just knowing what we've paid in the past for consultants with referenda work and with video services, that was kind of the ballpark.
Yeah, this is not a staff
this
person.
isn't
This is
staff.
not a staff person.
Okay.
This is a consultancy.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you for clarifying that.
Well, I know even during COVID, we would be watching presentations from other districts on how they were communicating, just what was happening. And I watched a couple of districts that instead of having a community engagement committee, they actually had community members participate in think tanks and their software. I had asked some questions about that. back then, and I was, you're met with, well, we don't have the money to pay for that software right now, but I know Edina had used some software that was very engaging, like 500 people could be on an online meeting, and they could be submitting their thoughts. Well, you can't do that in a committee of 15 people on a Tuesday morning. So I'm fully supportive of looking at what technology might be out there and resources, because I think, for me personally, as a marketer, I have to go to new technology all the time, because the way I do things is just totally different. After being in the business 30 years, things change. And our consumers are younger parents. Market differently than we do.
It's a huge time commitment also to do that, and to have that expertise, as well as maintain I don't know how many daily communications that need to be performed, the memorandums that need to be reviewed, and everything else. So now the other thing is not just for increasing enrollment. I remember Eastern Carver County did this, and we borrowed from it, from their safety protocol video. Remember that, Jim? We actually took theirs, and they used a consultant to put that whole thing together for the community and for training and stuff like that also. So they used the same type of capability, and then they went and hired that out. So I think we could use it. I think that anytime we improve that SEO, we're going to also get more engagement and get better feedback also.
Yep, for sure.
Well, if you figure roughly $8,000 of ADM per kid, that's 5 kids we need to make that consultancy a cost neutral, right? And so for me, it's about how do we I'd be ashamed if we couldn't find 5 kids. I don't know how else to say it. So, but yeah, I do, Julie, to your point as well, I do believe that, our demographic, of who we serve has changed, how we meet their needs, how we attract their ears, their decisions. I think multiple industries are responding to a change in market industry. It's out of my expertise area, but yeah, I think there's an opportunity for us to think differently. Thank you, Christy.
Thank you, Christy.
So the differentiation specialist, going back to a comment that Lisa made earlier around GT and that general budget. So years ago, we used to have GT specialists. I think they might have been called.
They were called Synergy Specialists.
Synergy Specialists. That was a model or an iteration of our GT programming in the district. And what this will allow us to do is really bring that differentiated support back to all of our campuses. Those students who are not enrolled in SAGE, there's very little support to manage and support maybe that advanced learning at a non-SAGE campus. If a student that's not in special education, but definitely needs some significant scaffolding to really, tie into that core curricular focus, that level of differentiation is also a need that exists. Not every teacher has all the skills nor all the time to put some of these frameworks together. So these differentiation specialists, that is their sweet spot. That would be the specific training set that we're looking for to really look at the polarized lens outside of the average learner, that we can definitely meet the needs of all of our kids. So this is a little bit of going back to what we kind of had that was cut about 5 years ago?
At least,
Yeah,
I would say.
maybe longer.
Yeah.
So with that, I just open it up, and Dr. Edwards here as well for some comments or questions that you all might have.
Just the piece I'll add to it is I had shared last week at our teaching and learning advisory the outcome of our gifted and talented program review specifically. And I'm going to be sharing that formally with the board at May 8th's board meeting. And within that, there's a visual on that summary that shows a diamond that is intended to represent what Dr. Thomas just laid out of the levels that students are at in terms of their access to their basic core education and the level of support that's needed to meet that need. And with this differentiation specialist position, we would present, and this is part of that recommendation for gifted and talented, an opportunity for a staff member, half-time staff member at each site, K through 8, to support teachers in meeting the needs of all learners at a higher level, and support what instruction looks like in the classroom, and provide additional resources, again, to teachers. So we really see this as a push into our sites, this type of position. That's what it would be.
And the updated curriculum is primarily the math.
Yeah, so an updated curriculum is a budget update to increase curriculum. I think I might have spoken a little bit about this at the board meeting last week when you approved the recommendation. But the budget that had been historically given to curriculum was only sufficient to meet what you took action on for the dollar amount for our K-5 curriculum. We have other needs, obviously, and so on an annual basis, we need to increase the allocation to that particular purchase or that particular area of expenses to meet our needs that are changing. The textbook has essentially gone by the wayside, and the vendors have found a way to increase the amount that that we need to pay in order to adopt curriculums that meet our needs, and just a cost of doing business.
So again, just going back to last week's conversation for the board, quickly here. So the option to move sooner to the latest edition is built into this cost. If you recall, there is a question on the table is, do we do it for 2 years versus 1 year, and save ourselves in, kind of a bi-year here? So that's another option for the board to consider as well.
And we also have other curriculum areas in the, science, for example, at the both elementary and at the secondary level. We have math coming online at the secondary level a year out, so the costs are there.
I'll just say, again, outside of this budget number, but to go where Dan is forecasting, between the post-COVID learner profile changes and the curriculum industry to respond now to how learning is occurring, in addition to, forgive me, Mary, AI, and how it's evolving, we are finding, you will begin to observe big IT merging with your big box publishers, because IT needs content and publishers need advanced technology. So you're going to start seeing these mergers occurring in these two industries. So I anticipate that curriculum in the future, in the very near future, is going to look very different than what we're engaging with now. And we'll find many schools in the K-12 industry moving to a different kind of platform of pedagogy as well as materials. So yeah, that's what folks are talking about in the field right now. So more to come on that as those two kind of mergers begin to occur, which they will find a way to pin it to the districts. If you want to educate kids, here's now the package you must be buying. It's unfortunate, but it's the market culture.
And what is your standard, but how does this compare to where you were in the past with curriculum? Like, where are you at?
So it's my understanding that previous, relatively speaking, for over 10 years, the budget for curriculum hadn't changed. And we saw, as we shared with regard to the math presentation, we are utilizing curriculum. Now, there were certain circumstances that caused that to take longer to adopt and update. But likewise in other curricular areas as well. Our curriculum per se is certainly outdated in many cases, or at least not keeping pace with the 7 to 8 year cycle of change. And so bottom line is it has been insufficient, but we had some ways to get by for a number of years. And because of some standards that were delayed in their adoption, et cetera. But as we move forward, I envision the need being this new reality of dollar amount that we're approaching here.
Can you quantify it? I'm sorry if I'm.
Yeah,
not clear.
350,000.
So from 350 to 560,
To-
and that includes the synergy specialties.
Yeah, so we would be
Thank you.
increasing
That's what I was looking
more than
for.
doubling the cost projected moving forward. And some of those costs this most recent year, we were able to offset with expenses using COVID dollars. But again, that, similar to what Michelle talked about in hers, those dollars go away, so we need to start planning forward for that in the general fund. So I think the cost of that 1.5 is about 160-ish, correct? So difference is about 400.
400,000.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan. Next category, Sam can speak to, and as you heard him present when he was sharing the A&I budget and program overview, our numbers for EL are continually rising. Particularly, we're seeing a sudden surge with our Russian Ukrainian families, this being a preferred resettlement area. We also are seeing that our level 1 and 2s, which is your entry and second tier levels of EL, are also increasing compared to your higher English acquisition students. So that's a growing demographic, specifically in our region. Those dollars, and then the liaison work that he spoke to is also tied to the A&I grant. And as our community becomes increasingly diverse with the various ethnic cultures coming in, having representatives that can connect at that rural micro level with the families has proven to be a line of support, a line of welcoming, and a line of trust that allows them to really choose PLSAS as well. So I'll defer to Sam for any questions that you all might have, on this line item.
And I can start by just adding some numbers to it too. 3 years ago, we were around 240 EL students in the district here. Right now, we are currently serving 340 students on a regular caseload.
Say that one more time.
Right now, we are currently serving 340.
Your
EL
first
students.
number.
240.
240, yeah.
Yep. So that's a growth of 100 students, despite exiting 50 students a year as well, too. So actually, the growth is actually much higher than that. The supported and increased EL FTE will also help reduce the travel time for our teachers. Currently, we have 2 teachers traveling to different buildings to provide service to students. And we have 1 teacher out of the 3 that travels to 3 different buildings. So not able to provide that, create that relationship time as they're now striving more so to provide contact time as required by the state. So an increase in FTE will allow the teachers to more so be at one building there to build a relationship with students and support students beyond just the academic needs that are there.
So what is the difference, Sam? I think, correct me if I'm wrong, so Freddie, he's kind of under the grant umbrella, is that correct? So this would be, the 4 would obviously be in addition.
And
Help me
Freddie,
understand the
And
difference.
Freddie is not a cultural liaison. Freddie is an American Indian Education Coordinator.
Thank
So
you.
he coordinates the Indian Ed programming there that's guided by the both federal and state Indian Ed dollars. There are cultural liaisons, as Dr. Thomas mentioned, are funded by our A&I grant, and these are more so for the language connections. We have currently 2 right now. Our East African liaison, who supports with our Somali students, and also our Spanish-speaking liaison, who supports our Spanish speakers, helping to provide interpretation to families and even for students as well. And it's also bridging any understanding between the home culture and the culture and expectations of the schools. With the 4 there, we're looking to add an additional Somali and Spanish-speaking liaison, which is our 2 largest population right now, and then also add a Russian and Vietnamese liaison as well, and that is our 3rd and 4th largest population there. And as you saw, it broke out there, the 1.5 English learner teacher and the 0.5 English learner lead teacher. EL practices are good for all students. They support academic language needs definitely for students whose English is as a second language. But we have students whose primary language is English also that also can benefit from EL strategies and EL lessons. So this 0.5 lead teacher will be able to go out and support general ed classroom teachers with EL strategies and also to provide any tips around meeting the needs of the students, whether they are identified as EL, primary English speakers who need academic language support, or formerly EL who have been exited from the program as well.
So let me just clarify, you're adding 6 employees, and are they all full-time?
Yes.
Those would be full-time. I mean, except for the half-time.
And the
Sam?
culture, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
And the cultural liaisons, do they work with, I understand they work with the families, right? Do they also, are they in the buildings working with the students?
Yes, yes, they are. For example, Ali right now is stationed at the high school there. So we help with the counselors if they need any additional support in communicating with the students as well as the parents.
So it does take some
Yes.
weight off of our counselors
Yes.
as well, so it frees up their time so that they can.
Yes, and Maria, she helps a lot with the special ed department as well to interpret with IEP needs and everything like that.
Sam, you mentioned a rate of 50 students exiting EL. Do you know how that compares to neighboring districts?
I did run a study on that, and we are actually the highest in our surrounding areas in terms of our performance in EL, despite being staffed at a much more difficult ratio than other districts around us.
Yeah, so I want to share that and emphasize that with the board. I'm proud of this team. We talked about this at the audit. We're a very lean staff here, and I think do a lot with the resources that we have. When I think about the preventative conversation we had earlier this evening, or when I think about the work that Sam is leading around our EL, imagine what success looks like when you have additional layers of support. So that 50 students, when he shared that with me, I was like, wow, that's not the norm. And so kudos to that team to be able to bring those academic, skills to a level where they can actually graduate out of the program. That's what you want. We don't want to foster dependency. Because they say on average it takes about 7 years.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's probably 7+, but very good.
Can you explain that more, Dr. Thomas, the 7 years?
Research shows that it takes about 7 years for a level 1 student to go through and graduate out and no longer need EL services and supports. So that's it.
And we are definitely well ahead of that mark in our district here.
Appreciate the context.
Mm-hmm.
Good, yeah.
Thanks, Sam. Then Emily will bring us home on this portion.
Jim Odell was bringing us.
Oh, Odell.
Save
Ooh, wow, I did not mean to do
the
that.
best for last.
There's some on the back.
I gotta scroll down further. All right, I'll let Emily speak to this. I'll just preface, sorry, I don't mean to take time on all of these, but there's a context to them all. But given what we're seeing legislatively happen right now, in our human resources team, again, like our communication, small but very mighty. And there's some significant concerns on the horizon with the types of legislation that's being discussed right now that would have significant impacts to our HR departments in our respective districts. And so I'll let Emily speak to some of the context and what that would actually equate to in terms of staffing support for some of the things that are coming on the horizon.
Thanks for your time this evening. So another thing that we're just constantly looking at, and I know that you already know this, but we're in a completely different world right now. We typically in the past had a pretty steady staffing, but right now we're acting more like a revolving door. So when looking at from 2014 to 2019, we were having resignation and termination and new hires around 400 to 500 each year. Now we're up in the 600, 650. While we're not necessarily adding significant numbers of FTE to our staffing, we're just in a completely different labor market. So we have constant more stress on our teams and our buildings because we have that turnover. And that turnover is equating to a significant workload in the department, but also equating to a significant need out in our buildings to address that. So with that, and then also the additional legislative that has already passed, the summer unemployment is one big one that we anticipate will significantly increase our workload in our departments between HR and payroll. There's more on the horizon too, like with the Minnesota wage theft law, additional requirements under the equal employment opportunity, and many other coming down the pipeline that just adds additional layers of work that we had to make sure to maintain compliance around. In addition to that is all the benefits. We're constantly seeing more need, being a self-funded group, to have more analytics around that. So we did make that move in the department earlier this year to remove the assistant director and exchange that for the benefits specialist. But we're seeing that that's now left another gap in needing that secondary layer of the assistant director to help with all the workload in those areas.
And 7 HR staff for 1,300 employees.
We have 5 in HR and 2 in payroll for 1,300 employees. And one thing that is difficult to talk about, but I do think it's important to acknowledge too, our adult behavior is also mirroring our student behavior, where we have seen some significant increase in the need to support our staff in areas that our adults need additional support in as well, whether that's professional development or that's helping work through the personnel process with our administrators.
I just wanted to ask something. With basically a dedicated benefits, which we have every year, the health benefits get more and more complicated, that's understandable, but as far as that, to actually deal with those behaviors and personnel issues and the daily questions that come up, what is the actual percentage workload allocation for the people that are actually doing that job? Is that 1,300 to 2, really? I'm
Sorry, I missed the last part of the question.
What is the actual HR staff to HR staff to actually employees that actually do that level, considering also that you also have to do policy quite a bit in your and contract negotiations and everything like that. I mean, that's
right.
It looks like it's more like 1,300 to 2, not 1,300 to 7.
I haven't done that desk audit to break down our FTE based off of all the different areas that the Human Resources Department and Payroll Department cover. But that's something we could consider. We are moving forward with the position description analysis with that vendor that we started with last summer. That might give us a better understanding of where all that breakdown is, but something I could get you more information on. Yeah. The team does a lot.
Thanks, Emily. Last but not least.
Thank you.
So generally speaking here, emergency preparedness, school safety is absolutely critical. It's very unfortunate, almost a daily occurrence that we're waking up to watch another tragedy occur, somewhere in our country, unnecessarily. And so one of the areas that Jim and his team are really investing in is rounding out the safety coordinator that you all approved and really bringing in infrastructure for her to really maximize the work around that. In alignment with that, we are seeing, and actually you all heard about this at last week's board meeting, behavior on buses is different than maybe when we were growing up. And getting cameras on our buses that have some of our highest support needs students Also, where we're gonna have the most liability as well is something that we're looking at around the safety needs. And then lastly, just we know that the sheer cost of resources, utilities, transportation costs, which is gonna get passed to us vis-a-vis our contract with the bus company, a lot of that's in there too. So I'll stop with that and let Jim speak to any specifics that you all might have inquiries about.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Good evening, school board. So the bulk of this money, the 646, is, as Dr. Thomas said, it's utilities, bus contract. Those are fixed costs that we know we're forecasting that increase.
And can you break that roughly, what you are, of the 646, what would that number look like roughly
So I
with
think we're
utilities?
looking at about 200,000 would be left for startup costs for,
Okay.
to start the safety department.
So 400 or so is in utilities and
and-
contract costs.
Yep, and I think that's about right, Tammy.
By the way, the utilities, we don't even, we have to spend that no matter
Those
what.
are fixed,
Yeah,
yeah.
so-
Yep, and we have, we're trying to minimize that. And,
Okay, no, I understand that,
I can
but
tell you we're doing it too, because I get nothing but complaints around here.
It is very cold.
I mean, it's all day long, Jim, it's cold, or Jim, it's hot.
There's gonna be a protest outside, it's gonna be our staff.
We have never said Jim it's
I
hot.
have to agree.
This building.
well, this former bowling alley, I understand.
Yeah, this is
but
a tough building.
Yeah, this
It's
is,
a tough building.
it's the
Yeah.
least
Thank you
energy
for-
efficient of the
And the
entire.
occupants are pretty
Habitating.
tough too. But, yeah, but that is one thing we can influence, and we try hard, and I think our numbers every year when we present our energy work show that we continue to drive our utility numbers down. And bus contract's already settled for 6% raise for next year, and that's the end of that contract, and then we'll look at beginning another contract next year for 24, 25, 26, I believe. 25, 26. But again, the board was, and I appreciate adding Haley as our emergency preparedness response coordinator, but there's some startup costs with that. It's like another department for the operations team. And we've done a great job historically, ad hoc for safety, but we're really putting some focus to it now. And so there are some costs. And some of those are administrative assistants. We're looking to add administrative assistant to help with not just that department, but LTFM, with our operations, transportation we have covered with Jody, doing the billing and all of that in that department. A lot of financial budgets, a lot of money that's going through that office, and we're asking for that help.
Would that be full-time, Jim?
That would be a full-time spread across 3 departments.
Jim, didn't we used to have a full-time for facilities? Was that, Joan was helping out with that, or is that something?
So Joan has helped
Yeah.
during construction and for SRM.
Right.
Those newer, Jim, can you say SRM?
So standard unification, the exercise that we've done for a couple of years, that again was a project we built from the ground up. And we leveraged a lot of help, Joan and Joel McCall, remember him, and Maureen and others in this, Christie. A lot of extra time, but we're trying to focus it now out of the operations team, and like Emily was talking, to supports for added responsibilities.
I have a question about SROs and
Okay.
evaluating like SROs across the district. Do you see, is there a need that could be added into here for SROs?
So they are currently, we have SROs now.
Yeah, no, I know, but do we need more
Um,
in our building?
That's a great
I
discussion
know,
point.
yeah, we share one at the middle school.
Yeah, right, we have one from Prior Lake and we have one for Savage.
But do they, I was under the understanding they share time. Maybe I'm not informed.
They share schools within their,
And Prior Lake is.
precinct.
So I think what you're getting at, Lisa, is they're one at each school all day, every day.
Right,
No,
right,
no, no.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, because
Or are other than our high school
There's
has
one at the
that?
high school full-time, right?
Well, and
Well,
Red Tail and
yeah.
Hamilton and Glendale.
Okay.
Yeah, so,
So we go by
There's-
precincts or cities.
Oh,
Primarily,
it shares among those
Correct.
depending on the city.
but obviously primarily the high school would be the hotspot.
I see.
Most districts will prioritize SROs to be stationed in the secondary campuses.
Right.
That's where we really need the support, and that's where we have our support kind of designated. As needed, they can cover, based upon precinct, any of our elementary campuses as well. But they're primarily supporting, I would say where I have seen SROs at the elementary usually has been medically related, not so much.
Yeah, or educational or.
Yeah, so.
And our middle schools and Bridges are on one campus at, so Prior Lake. So while they're not at each building, there's a presence on the campus
And rotate.
So they rotate.
between the buildings.
Yep.
So currently, we have the funding. Don't we have state funding that helps support that also? That's part of it?
Safe schools
Safe
levy, I
schools.
guess, is what you're talking about.
And then we negotiate with the cities, and they're also trying to hire. So we negotiate those contracts with the cities in order to put SROs within each precinct, right?
I'm going to defer to Tammy, that would be.
Yeah, we have two one with City of Prior Lake, one with City of Savage. They're each one's on a 3-year, one's on a 4-year, and neither one of them are up for renewal yet. And I think I'll have to double check, but I think it's somewhere around 40-something thousand. 60,000. I'll double check the amount.
And that's just the officer, that's not anything else.
Correct.
Unlike some districts who get pulled in for buying cars and all that other stuff. We're not doing any of that.
So when I look at the safe schools this year to next year, it's down about 60,000. What is that? Maybe you said that?
It's related to student count.
Got it.
It's
Enrollment.
$39 a student.
Okay. Given the world we're in today, right? I don't think we can talk about this enough. We could stay here all night talking about this and different plans and preparedness, and certainly have the experts in our buildings and you, Jim, leading that, and Haley. But at the end of the day, we all have to be super comfortable with what we're doing to make sure that we're creating these safe spaces, whether it's on buses or increased our SROs. I don't know, but I'm not giving a pitch saying this is everything, you can have all the money in the world and,
Right, no, and I understand that.
but I just can't emphasize enough, and we're getting a lot of questions and a lot of, are my kids safe? And it's fair,
Well, and I think a factor that we need to consider is what comes out of the legislation. Because right now, there's a lot of talk about non-discretionary discipline in the omnibus bills. And if that passes, then there may be even more a need for more support in our buildings. So it's something that I think we need to keep on our radar, so.
I think this is, in the conversation that we've had tonight with all of you is really reflective of the larger picture here. I think there's, to the emails that you're talking about, Amy, I'm getting those as well. Families asking about, when will we go for a safety referendum? And, I thought the tech levy was just about tech, but there's other safety stuff tied into that. You need to be really clear, go for it. Our community is clearly speaking about this. I think every community is speaking about safety, and rightfully so. But also keep in mind as we look, this bottom line number for us is a big number. It just speaks to the significant changes that have occurred in the very recent past for K-12 as an industry. And if we're going to be a thriving school system, what it's going to take in terms of critical investments to ensure that we are giving our best, to our students, our families, and ultimately maximizing the return on value for our citizens in this community. So, you know, this conversation certainly can be one that we talk about and still well within the means of our fund balance, okay, and still upholding the board's policy. And quite frankly, some of the assigned fund balances assigned just for the types of investments that we're making. But I think it also begs to question what's the longer conversation. To Lisa's point, there are things unknown at the legislature right now, regardless of how media is portraying this. No disrespect, but there's going to be this ticker tape parade of this big investment in education that may occur. And quite frankly, many of these bills come unfunded. And it's going to have a significant financial impact. And so I'll be honest with you, I'm concerned with the public's perception that we received this windfall of money through the legislature that may not come true. So I just need to be very upfront with the board and our community that's dialing into this conversation. You know, I'm not confident yet that we aren't going to be left holding the money bag on some unfunded mandates, which has been center of our legislative platform. So, you know, can we do this? Yes, we can. Should we do this? That's the bigger question. And I think it's a question for our community. Does our community value this? If they want this, this also opens up conversations at some point in our future about additional support from our community, because it's not all going to come from the state. You know, I'm confident about that.
Well, my question is, you said those two.
What's that?
Can we and should we?
Yeah.
But how long can we do it for?
Well,
Is the thing I look at.
yeah, and we don't want to boomerang either, and so we're being mindful of that. We need to be stewards of our resources, and we don't want to open up, you know, all these resources only a year later to say, and because XYZ didn't happen at the state, we now got to pull this back. There's a couple of strategies that we can look at in terms of, you know, how we can potentially shift certain monies based upon certain bonds that we are looking at that might help with some of the capital stuff, some of the camera stuff perhaps. Not everything will be a easy swap dollar for dollar, but what I can say is that I don't know if nothing changes at the state level. We are going to have a community conversation about their value proposition for PLSAS schools and what we are offering our kids. And I just believe that's going to be a conversation we're going to have. And
Can we just,
Dr. Thomas, sorry, Mary.
it's okay. I was just gonna say that we are one of the few districts that doesn't have a tech levy. So on top of everything else, the safety funds, the technology funds are also coming out of our general fund.
correct.
Whereas other schools actually had that separate levy for a past referendum in which they were taking it out.
We also have not levied to the max as well.
Right, and our ops levy was actually lower because our projection of students was much greater than what the demographers actually said. So we actually charged less for our basic operating baseline also, because we anticipated more students. Therefore, it was going to be balanced out, and you know, so we have a lower. We're not levying to the maximum. We have lower than normal that came in with the construction, with the added space, with the added everything, and we have no tech levy. So we're actually taking a much larger percentage of our general fund to do basic operational facilities and basic support services than pretty much all but maybe 4 districts in the whole state. So we have that added on top of the fact, as what Dr. Thomas just said, if all that stuff passes, we actually lose money from the amount of money coming back from the state. We'll actually suffer, I think, over $1 million less than what they're actually giving us in addition, and that's if we don't experience the inflation that we think we're going to experience, especially since the majority of them are now going to no inflationary increases from what I hear from both the House and the Senate now. So Yeah, I mean, we get all this money back in and we'll be worse off. That's the weird thing.
We also did not build an inflationary factor into our referendum.
Right, which is also
Every
unusual.
other district
Yeah.
does.
Most districts do because they have to.
So we have this town hall.
Mhm.
Thank you. You know, clearly, which is, I'm guessing you're updating from last time because, you know, we know
Mhm.
a lot more than last time. So, you know, is that, I'm guessing it's yes, but that's a great opportunity, you know, for our community to kind of come in and understand,
Mhm.
you know, kind of what we're up
Absolutely.
against, or maybe not as in the weeds as like what you just said, but like, I think that's important to know too, and just, you know, what, the ticker tape celebration, kind of like what you talked about, like, yes, great, you know, fund education, that's fantastic, but as you said, like, it comes with, no pun intended, a price.
Mhm.
And I think that's important, and I really hope that a lot of members of our community come tomorrow or tune in
Mhm.
and hear that, because I think it's a great opportunity to.
Yeah, and that, like last time, will be flipped to YouTube so that our PTCs can have access to play it at one of their PTCs as well, if they can't come out. But, yeah, I think it's really important to really help inform our community. And this is not to, you know, put fear out there. I just think we are trying to be as truthful and honest as we can with the information that we know today. You know, hopefully the state surprises us, but.
There is one thing, is there any district that's actually in favor of these unfunded mandates? I mean, I haven't heard one. They're all thrilled, but they're saying, fine, give it to us, but fund it.
There's
right now,
there's not
there's
an
no-
association
If there's
that-
no district, then who's pushing it, would be the question.
Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing, I'm not, you know, it's
Who's
an,
in
it's,
favor of it?
yeah.
Well, yeah, and we have to be loud with our opinions, and we're
Yep.
trying, I mean, we're reaching out,
We are.
we're
We've sent
advocating, the
letters. Our
associations are doing a
associations have sent
phenomenal
letters.
job.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
we need to reach out to our legislatures who are supporting it,
Mhm.
you know, versus the ones that are,
That is true.
that are fighting for
That
it,
is
so.
Yeah,
I think everyone has a good intention, but the problem is understanding how much this is gonna cost and then taking away of local control. Because every district has slightly different needs, and we should be able to spend the money as we need, not as they're dictating. Because it's not gonna necessarily benefit us the same way as others, especially if it's unfunded.
You had another question?
I just have one last question,
Mhm.
hopefully.
Mhm.
So if I'm reading this correctly, and we've got the expenses and the revenue, and it shows the budget shortfall of 6.793 million, but then listed below, these are our projected unassigned and unassigned after this,
Yeah.
okay.
before and after.
So can you help clarify the policy that I'm reading, the minimum fund balance policy? Am I understanding correctly that it's the 8 to 12% is for the unassigned and assigned combined? Or is it separated as you have it
That's
listed
how
on the
this-
list below?
This district here has it as a combined.
Okay, so,
Mhm. We
versus how
are just
you're
being very
separating it,
transparent to
okay.
show.
but it
'cause
is a combined number
It is a
of
combined
8 to
number.
12%.
But again, the reason why we have it separated, again, for the community who's watching this back, assigned is very restricted. There's very little that we can do, it's very prescribed. A little bit more looseness, obviously, with unassigned. So we just like to, you know, let folks know where we have our wiggle room.
Okay,
But yes, you're right, total.
okay, just wanted to make
Mhm.
sure I was clear on that,
Yep.
or understanding that correctly, so.
Yeah.
We're kind of, I don't want to be too doom and gloom in all of this, because we could be sitting in a much worse situation like some of our neighbors are. So, I mean, I want to keep that perspective in mind as we're moving forward, but again, to your point, Julie, like, it's not sustainable.
Mhm.
So we have to make choices and priorities here that we believe we can sustain and affect the biggest change with, you know, as a board. And recommendations, obviously, from administration.
We'll certainly keep you updated as things settle in the legislature on,
Yeah.
on what, and there's a lot of, not a lot, there is some projection in these numbers that as they work through their, whatever they're gonna do, we can finalize and get much. And Worst case scenario, we'll do a budget amendment after they don't
Right.
settle till after June
Mhm.
or July.
Thank you for all your help
Yeah.
putting this
Yeah.
together over the weekend, by the way.
The
So,
other two documents, I'll just say, are more for your information and probably relate more to our next conversation. There was some questions around settling of the contract, so we just added that just so you were aware of information that you were asking. Again, more to come as we know more.
Do you want more discussion here with direction, or do you?
Really tonight, our intent was to put the total package out there to the community, to the board, to the community. If there's feedback you all have for us in terms of things that resonate to you, that you, as a board, say, yeah, this particular item is something that we definitely want to see you continue to pursue, that would be helpful for us as we go back to give another iteration and kind of reprioritize the priorities. So, if you,
Individually, or
what's that?
individually? Both?
Tonight, like now, if you had anything to share tonight as a board, but absolutely individually, you all could, but again, individually, you don't govern, so if the will of the board tonight, if there's
Directionally.
things that you all are saying, Michael, your team, this is something we want you to continue down this path here. We'd like to see you come back with, maybe a modification in this line item. That would be good direction for our team as we go back to kind of refine.
Is Jim still here? So the only thing that really stuck out for me, I'm constantly asking when it's full-time employees, because I'm always interested in people in buildings. But in the safe, in your category, Marcus has done a wonderful job continuing to remind us how hard and we work with what little resources we have. I don't want to open up a whole conversation of all this holes we have in our Swiss cheese here, but if we were gonna add any more layers of security, or look at what those look like, I think your bucket might have an opportunity to be analyzed a little further of like what a wish list would be. Because how do we ask our community in a year or two to support what we've talked about as technology and safety and security if we don't really know? But like I said, I don't want it to be this, oh, look how unsafe we are, right? Nobody is any safer than anybody at any other time, right? We know that. But what those things could look like, because I think it has changed over the last 10 years. And just even getting in and out every buildings and that. So not to go crazy, but just I would be interested in hearing.
Got that?
Enhanced.
Got that noted? Any other general feedback of what you heard tonight?
One of the things that does concern me is if they do put those unfunded items and they pass them, then I'd like to preempt just preparing for that, and actually prioritize within each of the buckets and say, this is, there's things that, everything's needed and about 10 times more. I think there's no doubt about that. But if we had to whittle this down in order to keep within fund balance, particularly if something happens, that will take away from that 4% and the cross-subsidy addition, and also knowing that the full-time will be an ongoing expense, and we don't know if some of the additions to our bottom line are going to be ongoing. I just would like to see them prioritized, and again, I want to say that and be very cognizant of the fact of that this has already been prioritized, and a lot of people have done a lot of work to get here, but unfortunately, that's the reality that we live in. And I'd also like to see us have more or less within each of the areas, a red line is I have to do this in order to meet the minimum for my students.
I'm kind of smiling because that's actually kind of an activity that we've done as a team of what's legally obligated versus what's a want or a nice to have or would be good to enhance. So we will go back. So I'm hearing two things. One, can we go back to maximize, let's say, get to the high end of the fund balance? So let's get our bottom line to 12% max. That's one thing I'm hearing you say. Second thing I'm hearing you say is to reprioritize the priorities, and it's like what's legally obligated. If we had to say we can only do these two things, what would those two things be?
Right.
And as our next iterative conversation with you on this. Okay.
And can I throw in one thing that I have to say, just because it's something in here? I personally would put the counselors above everything else, that we absolutely have to increase those.
Okay.
And what we have here is really an increasing still by a minimum. So I just want to throw that, that's my opinion. I can't speak for everybody else, but that would be one thing that I would probably have a hard time ever agreeing to dropping.
Question, peer counselors, unless I missed it somewhere in here, which I don't think I did, but how do we feel about where we are with peer counselors, and is there?
You mean peer coaches or peer counselors?
Peer counselors? Okay. Not sure of the difference.
What are peer counselors?
Maybe it's peer coaches.
Okay, okay.
Sorry, Michelle, you're.
No, I was thinking, my face, sorry.
Sorry, that's what I mean. Sorry. if
Okay,
my
so ask your
nomenclature was
question again
off.
about peer coaches.
How do we, meaning the district, feel about where we are, staffing wise for peer coaches?
So I guess I would say that, just like anything, we are lean. That being said, we actually had intended to have 10 peer coaches this current school year, but due to a variety of factors, changes in staffing that happened right at the start of the school year, we had some late resignations in the teaching ranks, and we prioritized putting some folks out of the peer coaching ranks back into the classroom in a couple of hard-to-fill teaching areas. So we've been at 9 peer coaches all year. We had intended to be at 10. We are going back to what our intended 10 was. So we had a reduction from what we set out to go on this year. And I think that our peer coach, our QComp coordinator, would say that the fact that we are actually committed to the 10 for next year is definitely a desirable position to be in. The most desirable, probably not, but it is at a point where we do feel we can meet the needs of our teaching staff and have a ratio that is manageable for our 10 peer coaches that we have.
And I would just add to that, our teacher evaluation system is changing next year, and it's getting more rigorous. And so the peer coaching need is going to increase. We're going to feel that. So how do we help teachers perform at standard? That whole bar is being raised, and so we'll by default see the need for peer coaches. So going back to what we had, which seems to be the theme tonight, but going back to what we had in an environment that has surpassed the needs of the past, we're really not gaining tons of ground, but we're doing what we can with the finite resources that we have. And again, trying to maximize those dollars as much as possible. So, hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you.
Well, and with the different changes in the educational system, are there positions currently that are not effective, that maybe we need to switch into a different position within the wish list? I'm not sure, but that might be something else to look at as they're going through each area, if there's just a different way
Yeah, and
to do things differently.
There is, and we will be in a little robbing Peter to pay Paul situation, like you just heard Dan talk about how we took those coaches and we made them teachers because we needed to do that. Well, now we're feeling the pinch because we've overcut our coaches and our teachers are struggling and clamoring for support. So it's a fine line, but we definitely can go back and look at, holistically, I think to Lisa's point about, what can we take off the plate and find cost savings too, continually. Well,
Yeah,
thank you,
I
board.
mean, well, I'm just gonna give my 2 cents, because, that's the way it works. So, I mean, when I look at all this, the student-facing pieces around staffing is probably huge on my priority list. Tech and safety both are, and HR support, I think, has been loud and clear over the last year to help with staffing. But really, those are all topics that cover everything on this list. So that's not a fair answer. So it's a matter of priorities, but we also, of course, have to manage the fund balance, and we have to be stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. And as our students' needs change and our students evolve, wasn't that our friend who said that the other night? I kind of, to Lisa's point as well, like, I think we really have to think about legacy programming and reevaluate opportunities to not necessarily, I'm not saying specific people or targeting anything, but reevaluating what is really supporting this evolving learner, as opposed to we just do it because we've always done it. And I know that that's the conversations you guys are having, but I just want to call it out because it's important.
That's fair. Well, Chair Crosby, Board of Directors, that's all we had for our work session topic for you tonight. Thank you for the feedback, and we'll be coming back to you all with another iteration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That ends our study session, and we'll go to maybe a 5-minute break, and then we'll go to our meeting. It said it can't, that means it can't start before 7. Yeah, that wasn't a typo, but yeah.
Not going
Good
4 hours,
question.
but only
Meet
1
our
hour, it's not bad,
Are we
Julie.
over expectations, under expectations? I just like to know where we're at. Are we staying here or do we go up there?
We'll move up there.
Yep.
All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order for the Board of Education, special added meeting tonight. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call tonight. All board members are present except for Enrique Velazquez, who is gone tonight. We are looking at, sorry, before I go on to say what's on the agenda, I need approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? So made. By Director Olsted, a second.
Second.
By Director Burnick. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 6-0. So our business items for tonight include approving 3 slates of employee contracts. They're based on parameters that were set by the board to come to agreement with these particular employee groups. The first is the MOU for the ALC coordinator to the principal's contract. Can I get a motion to approve?
So made.
By Director Wernick, a second.
Second.
By Director France. And Director Herman, do you have anything you want to elaborate on here? And then we can go on with questions.
Thank you, Chair Crosby, members of the board, Dr. Thomas. We're bringing forward to the board to in line with other districts who have made the move to bring their ALC coordinator into their principal's contract, aligning it with the high school assistant principal, but also making sure that we protect the position's unique skill set and structures with the families from the assistant principal's position so that the bumping rates don't crossover between the two. So we negotiated that with them that you'll see under number 4.
Any questions for Director Herman before we vote?
I'd like to make a comment. Thank you very much for not creating a separate contract on top of all the other ones. This should help quite a bit as we move forward.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That passes 6-0. That moves us on to the 2024 confidential group settlement. The details of that are also listed in the packet, and I need a motion to approve.
So made.
By Director Olsted. Can I get a second? Second. By Director Burnick. And Director Herman, would you like to elaborate?
Chair Crosby, members of the board, Dr. Thomas. As we get into the next two here, just wanted to give a big shout out to both Tammy's team and my team in the business office and human resources. One of the major district priorities this round of negotiations was to look at all of our contracts, all the different minute changes, but still changes that causes inconsistencies throughout our district and creates inefficiencies with our operations. So with this, all these changes, we were able to bring that we had 57 different benefit classes, if you will, different offerings that created 57 different benefit packages down to 37. So just within this one round, we're able to cut down 20 different packages there, so we continue to move in an effort to get our contract streamlined. With this, the confidential employee group that covers the human resources specialist, benefits specialist, payroll specialist, business office assistant, and human resource assistant, we utilize those same parameters that were set by the board and made adjustments to align their contract with other like contracts as well.
Questions or comments for Director Herman from directors?
Yeah, I just have a question, being new to the process. So when you say that board parameters, can you help me understand how that's applicable to all these contracts and how you come up with the list of things that are listed here that have been reviewed and are being asked? Like, is it a total number? Is it a total percentage? Like, I'm just trying to understand that.
So I can also have Director Frederickson chime in here too. When the board parameters that are set, we look at different priorities that the board has, and we also look at the financial package. From the priorities that were set, when we brought forward this information to the board last spring over the summer to start our negotiations process for the 22-20 to 24 contracts, we talked about what we see as administration, what we're hearing from our employee groups of where there are some items that we need to look at with our contracts, whether that be there's concerns around insurance, there's concerns around paid time off, or a whole list of items that we talk about in closed session. And then we, as a group, find out from the board on what those priorities are for the district, that what we'll be addressing when we go to the table. Then we also have the financial parameters that are set as well. So that's when you hear us talk about staying within, or in this case below, the board parameters of 6% was the financial package that we had to work with. Then we go to the employee groups or the bargaining groups at the table and hear from them directly what their priorities are, where their alignments are, and then move towards a tentative agreement to bring forward to the board.
Now, just to add, when we talk about the total contracted package, when you're approving in this case, the board had approved a 6% compounded interest. Compounded interest means that you take your base year, you add whatever it is you're adding for your first year one of the contract. In this case, if it, for instance, a 2% salary increase, then in year two, because you're not reverting back to the base year, you're increasing the year one by another 2%. So you're adding essentially the increase in year one, and then in year two, you're adding the increase in year one plus the increase in year two. So that's how you're getting to a compounded interest rate of 6% when you're only increasing the salaries by 2%. And then as we do the costing, we're looking at not only just salaries, but we're looking at any health and benefits, what the cost is for that. We're looking at if there was any, for instance, a cell phone or professional development or mileage or whatever, longevity, steps and lanes. You're looking at the entire package of what the actual cost is for everything included in that package, not just the salary. So the board, when they set the parameters of that 6% for the compounded increase, they also asked us to streamline some of the benefit packages, and what was the third? Put in the language around the health insurance. So those were the three things that we went into each of the negotiations with, and then had our costing package. And then as we negotiate with the different bargaining units, we say, here's what our parameters are, here's the total cost that we're authorized to approve in a contract. And then we begin that negotiation process with those groups. Does that help answer that
And
question?
so are these items still negotiable, or is this like, we've already negotiated and this is our final?
What
or-
you see in front of you is what the final negotiation, they've already voted on approving their contract, so the different groups have to agree to it before we bring it into you. Otherwise, we continue with negotiations.
I mean, the only one that I had a question about was the one about the different contracts where we're going from $150 mileage stipend to a month to $300 mileage stipend.
Let's hold that one, because that's on 9A3, I think.
That's fine.
It's not on, is it in this one, or am I missing it?
What's on?
That is not in this
Not
memo.
in this one, sorry,
section,
this
yeah.
is on the
Oh.
confidential group settlement, so we're not
Oh, sorry,
quite to
next
that
one. Okay, sorry
Yeah.
about that.
But we'll address it when we
Okay,
open that up.
this is the confidential, okay.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments about this specific confidential group settlement? Okay. All in favor of approval?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 6-0. So now we'll move on to the 22-24 agreements and terms and conditions of employment. And I think some of, well, first I should, take a motion to approve.
So made.
Thank you, Director
Second.
Burnick. Second, thank you, Director Atkinson. And I'll open that up, but I first want to introduce by saying, I mean, it's 11 pages of information. It's a lot to digest, hence some of your questions, which I totally get, especially being relatively new. And I also just, given the parameters that we gave the team, I want to give a big thanks to Director Herman and Frederickson that you worked really hard to come to these tentative agreements. Going from 57 to 37 is a nice change. Making more consistent language is a nice change. Getting some more fixed instead of variable costs is a nice change. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of work. The costing models are really helpful as well that you have been working on, and a lot of explaining, a lot of learning and listening, and just bringing people together. And I think you guys have done a nice job, and I want to say thank you for that. And open it up to the table for anyone who has questions or comments.
Mileage?
Yeah, I'll just.
What page are you on, by the way?
So there's just certain contracts, I looked through them, and there's a couple contracts where we are paying currently $150 a month for a car. Some contracts say car allowance, some contracts say mileage allowance, I believe. And we're changing that to 300. And so my question is like, did that role change to justify the need to increase the mileage? And then I also wonder, like, is that mileage being paid also during the summer months? And, you know, where they're not driving as much?
Yeah, Director Atkinson, I can speak to that. This was in our, one of our many attempts to streamline the benefit offering. So when looking at the different classifications of our employee groups and the expectations under the employee groups for travel, we had some that were getting the 300 and some that were only getting the 150, even though they had similar travel expectations. Those travel expectations are for those individuals to be out in our buildings, but also to attend conferences, to attend their professional professional networking groups to make sure they're staying up to date in their areas of expertise as they bring that back to the district. So it's not just the travel within the district, but it's also the travel with outside the district. One good example is that whether that's their monthly meetings or their yearly conferences that they're traveling to, that then we're not reimbursing them for mileage. Instead, they're getting that stipend. So that switch was to look at that classification group where those groups were in alignment with each other. And then one of the areas that we looked at to reduce the discrepancies between some of them getting the 150 versus others getting the 300.
And could you just have them submit their mileage for reimbursement? I mean, versus the stipend? Like I said, with the summer months where people aren't driving as much, I calculated out to be 400 miles, 461 miles that the employee would have to drive a month in order to make up the $300 in mileage at 60.65 rate. So
that is definitely something that we could look at in the future to figure out what that cost analysis would look like. Because I can't speak to it right now, but my first response to that would be I don't know that I would assume that summer travel would have less for some of these positions. I think it might potentially be quite the opposite. In the summer months, might need more travel, depending on the roles and responsibilities. I don't have that data in front of me to do that analysis currently, but something we could look at in the future. I know that from a best practice standpoint, typically you move to a stipend amount when it does cause less cost to the district. It does cause less administrative burden that then takes away time for them to do their other roles and responsibilities because they're doing the mileage and then the business office is doing the reimbursements. It's just a less efficient way of doing that when there are positions that need that higher level of travel. But definitely something that we could look at in the future.
Thank you.
It may be worthwhile to add that if you look at the historical financials, sometimes there was 12 to 14 pages of nothing but 50 cents here, $1.50 here, $9.70 there, and most of the people that were doing that, it was taking hours in the business office to calculate that, and there's some positions, even during the summer, that have to go, particularly in tech, that have to go from building to building nonstop because that's their job and they're using their own car. It was all over the board as far as getting that standard out there. And I know by looking over the pages and pages of financials that had to do with that and knowing it was the same people in the same positions all the time. And granted, 1 month they may have been on vacation and then the next month they made up for somebody else, so their time was more. I had questions about how we couldn't normalize that for almost 3 years in a row, simply because that filling out the pages at the end of every single month and then having to individually type in each day and the number of miles, and then they would have to calculate each direction.
Yeah, Director France, I'm clearly aware of the logistics. I fill out expense reports every month for my job as well. And so what I'm questioning is the dollar amount. We have buildings that are, I think the farthest building is like 4 miles in our district. So we don't live in a high mileage area. And so I'm just asking, does it make sense to increase that dollar amount from 150 to 300 is what I was asking. I mean, someone has to drive 461 miles. There's also a lot of weeks where we're not open. Our district's not open because of vacations, and so that was my call out.
I think it's good to have questions and deep dive. I think right here, right now, we're at a point where you've reached a tentative agreement, and so we're kind of beyond that point, and the agreements were reached within the parameters that you were given. So as we move forward, you know, we're always going to be asking questions that are deeper dives, but I think today in this realm that we're working within and where you have met our parameters, and that's what we gave you to go to the table with. They have agreed. We have a tentative agreement. If we have more clarity needed from board directors, I'm happy to keep it open for questions.
Yeah, I also had a question about moving the monies from professional development into the 403, which is like a 401k, right? So what was the rationale behind that?
Director Atkinson's, one of the board priorities was to address the professional development funds. And so we did look at a way to address that was to moving those funds to a different location to help slowly reduce those funds over time.
No. I mean, I get it, but I don't understand why you would take away dollars away from professional development. But that was the board decision that was previous to my sitting in this chair, so.
If I may add some more context, the professional development was also being used for items. So they would use their dollars to buy a laptop, for example. And I think that was a conversation that I brought to the board earlier in the fall when I first started, as I started getting these requests. And so from my vantage point, professional development is to enhance your skill sets. If there's technology that's needed, then that needs to be part of the package that we provide our employee, not that they use their professional development dollars for that. So the board at that time said, let's find a way to reduce that, and so that's part of the strategy of we're tightening up the parameters around PD.
Thank you for adding clarification around that.
Any other questions or comments for Director Herman? Okay, all in favor of the 22-24 agreements and terms and conditions of employment listed in the packet?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That passes 6-0. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
So made.
By Director Bullion. Can I get a second?
Second.
By Director Atkinson. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes 6-0. Thanks, everybody. Good night.